Welcome back. Welcome to this special bonus episode of Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf. Okay, first up, housekeeping. If you didn't hear it now. We have a new Season 3 premiere date. Season 3 starts on Friday, June 13th. Okay? We're starting with Communion by Whitley Strieber, and I'll talk all about it, and I'll talk all about how I couldn't stop thinking about being abducted by aliens as I drove back and forth from Pasadena to Santa Monica in the middle of the night during the writing sessions when Matt Reeves and I were doing our first movie, Dark Territory, which became the cinematic triumph Under Siege 2 Dark Territory. So you'll hear all about that. So get ready for that. It'll be a big two-parter. It'll start on Friday, June 13th. That's right, Friday the 13th. Now, before that, on Friday, May 30th, Susan Lambert will be back with me to do a Season 3 special preview episode. And that'll run at the end of this month on May 30th. We'll talk about some of the upcoming episodes and also fill you in on some dates for live shows, which we're in the process of putting together now. And I can tell you this just came up. I will be in Dallas in August. So Dallas people, meet me in August. I'll give you the exact date soon. We're still nailing it down. But yeah, Dallas in August. It's like a song. Now, today, I'm excited to bring you my conversation with author and friend Mark O'Connell. Mark wrote the definitive biography of J. Allen Hynek, known as our UFO dad, as Rob Christofferson likes to call him. But that book is called The Close Encounters Man because J. Allen Hynek is the man who coined the phrase close encounters of the first kind and the second kind and, of course, the third kind. He takes no credit for the fourth and fifth kind. That's somebody else's responsibility. And don't get me started on the sixth kind, okay? Anyway, Mark is a wonderful writer and a great guy, and The Close Encounters Man is a really great book that I think you guys, if you don't know about it and you haven't read it, get it. It's really fun. And Mark has a new book coming out, actually came out this week, called The Year Science Changed Everything, 1957, the International Geophysical Year and the Future of Our Planet. So we end up talking a little bit about that and a lot about J. Allen Hynek and Steven Spielberg and Carl Sagan and Ivan Sanderson and the Abominable Snowman's Footprints and Mark's current docuseries, The Lost Monster Files. And this is so good, a story that'll change everything you thought you knew about Jacques Valleé and the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I think you know where I'm going with this, but you're going to find out soon enough. Okay, here we go. Mark, it has been a while since we've spoken.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was thinking this afternoon, how did we meet? Do you remember?
Vaguely. I mean, we met through social media, right?
That makes sense.
Remember that much, right?
Back when it was fun and safe and all about
yeah, exactly. You met interesting
nice
people who you like to talk to.
Right.
Yeah. So that was, we crossed paths in one social media platform or the other. I think what might have happened is that I was talking a lot about some of the reality TV projects I was involved in. I think I was just like posting little things about that. And
That's right.
You started following my my posts at that point. And at one point you contacted me and said, hey, you know, I know some people who work in reality TV. I'd be happy to introduce you. And that's kind of where it went.
Now I remember. Does
that sound right?
Yes, it totally sounds right. And we were gonna, you had that, you had a very interesting premise and we floated it and it didn't quite work. And somehow we're not in the world of reality TV, which might be a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. But hey, we've made it through the last couple of years. So we're doing good.
Well, I actually am still in the world of reality TV. I'm co-executive producer. I'm co-executive producer on a show called The Lost Monster Files. The first season of it aired on Discovery. Well, actually, now it's on. I think now it's on HBO Max. Do you want to hear the story?
I mean, is it still? It's running. I mean, I and the listeners can go watch this, right?
Yeah, it's running. and we're waiting on pins and needles right now to find out if they'll renew us for a second season. So we got our fingers crossed on that.
I know that feeling.
So what happened was, this goes all the way back to when I was first researching my first book, The Close Encounters Man. And I had gotten access to this archive of material in a gentleman's basement in his house in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And at that point, I was researching UFOs because my first book was about UFOs. But one day when I was wandering around this gentleman's basement in his garage and looking at his just stacks and stacks of, we're talking about like old UFO reports and correspondence between government people and UFO investigator, just a really incredible amount of archival material that went into my first reality show, UFO Witness, a couple of years ago. But one of those days that I was there researching, I sort of walked around a corner to a new bookshelf and saw all these journals from a guy named Ivan T. Sanderson.
What?
And I immediately, that was my response too. Like, what the hell? Shelf after shelf after shelf, plus boxes filled with plaster castings of Abominable Snowman footprints.
Real ones?
Well, as far as anyone can say, yes. Although I will tell you, Michael, the guy who owned the house and is sort of custodian of these treasures, he would be able to look at each of the castings, and he would be able to tell us which ones were legit, which ones weren't. He knows this stuff inside and out. So at any rate, so I make this amazing discovery. I'm just in awe. And I go straight to Michael, the guy who owns the house. And I said, hey, I'm all about the UFOs right now, but I just saw your Ivan T. Sanderson material, and I'd love to work with you at a later date to see if we can develop this as, a book or a TV show or some kind of media presentation, because this work is just too valuable to be hidden away in your garage in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So that's how it started. And for your listeners who aren't familiar with Ivan T. Sanderson, he is generally credited as the father of cryptozoology. He was a zoologist and an explorer and an adventurer. There's a little bit of Indiana Jones in this guy's background. For instance, on I think it was his 21st birthday, he spent sitting on the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza, because his tour guide got drunk and passed out. So he was stuck at the top of the pyramid overnight on his birthday. He's that kind of guy.
It's funny because I was just going to say, it sounds like John Keel in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they have a lot in common, I think. That's a really good comparison. Yeah, and Ivan Sanderson wrote a lot, and he wrote a lot about his original interest in cryptids was the Abominable Snowman. That broadened to include, various, variations on that, Bigfoot, Yeti, Sasquatch. But then he also got interested in other sorts he got interested in creatures of the air and creatures under sea. And he got interested in UFOs up in the air and under sea. He was one of the first people to start talking about unidentified submersible objects. He wrote a whole book about it.
Right.
So this was just unbelievably good material for a TV show, and Discovery loved our pitch. And, like I said, we had our first season, 6 episodes that just ran last fall. And like I said, I'm pretty sure right now it hops around from streaming service to streaming service. I'm never quite sure, but it's called The Lost Monster Files. You can always just look it up under the title.
Lost Monster Files. That is so great. That's a great title.
It's been a really fun show to work on, I have to say.
All right, I want to see that. Oh, that's so great. Okay, so wow. You've been doing the reality TV. I've been trying to do regular TV. That's how we've spent our last 2 years. But that's funny because that is how we met. I do remember that now. Yeah. It's all coming back to me. And then right around that time was when Close Encounters Man was published. Isn't that right? What year was that?
I think that that was earlier. That book was published in 2017. So it's actually a pretty old book now.
Okay. But sort of a classic in the field now because it gets referred to all the time.
Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. Yeah.
For those of you who might not know, The Close Encounters Man, of course, is a biography of J. Allen Hynek. And we've never talked about it in depth, but to me, what was always most interesting about him was that transformation, kind of that classic transformation from skeptic, obviously very rooted in a scientific professional life, to, I don't know. I mean, you could call it believer, or you could call it someone who saw something in the phenomena worth investigating.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He was an investigator who was constantly pushing for a rigid academic study of UFO phenomena.
And what exactly was his scientific background to begin with?
Well, he was a professor of astronomy. He taught at The Ohio State University. He put in a little time at Harvard, but spent most of his career at Northwestern University in Chicago teaching astrophysics. I think he may have been the chair of the department. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, he spent 25 years teaching astronomy at Northwestern. And all this while, he was also doing this side gig working for the U.S. Air Force in their Project Blue Book program, which I'm sure most of your viewers are familiar with. It's the U.S. Air Force's official analysis of the UFO phenomenon. Hynek was their scientific consultant for that. Whenever the Blue Book investigators came across something that had a scientific aspect to it, say like a celestial phenomenon, strange things in the sky, not UFOs, but things like, stars and comets and whatnot, they would bring Hynek in and say, okay, you know about this stuff. Tell us what this is. Did this person see a comet or a sundog or something like that? Or was there something more substantial going on there? So that was his job, basically, to sort through the case reports and separate the good from the bad.
And then did he push for further involvement, or did they just keep drawing him in to the point where he was, before he knew it, he was waist deep?
It's a little of both. And it's actually, I was surprised at how complicated that whole story was when I first started researching it. To describe it, I'm not even sure where to start. Well, here's where I can start. When the UFO craze started in 1947 and people started reporting UFOs to the Air Force, to the local police, a lot of these reports would end up going to the Air Force Base, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. That sort of became the de facto UFO headquarters for Project Blue Book, was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And they tried to find numerous scientists, all of whom passed. They just didn't want to be associated with it. And then they ended up finding this junior astronomy professor at the Ohio State University, and they approached him about it. Say, hey, you know a lot about stuff in outer space. Would you come to work with us and help us do what I described, sort through all the case reports and discount the ones that were clearly astronomical phenomena, and sort of, and which was about 80% of the reports. And then he would separate those from the 20% that he couldn't explain. Now, the thing is, at first, it didn't bother him that he couldn't explain 20% of the sightings. It just didn't. It seemed like that was within the margin of error. It wasn't a big deal to him. So he worked on Blue Book for a year or two. Or actually, it wasn't Blue Book. It was Project Sign to begin with. I want to get the terms right. So he worked for Project Sign as a consultant. His contract was up. He went back to OSU to continue teaching. A year or so later, the Air Force comes back to his classroom and says, "Hey, we need you again. Are you available?" So Hynek goes back to work. By now, Project Sign has become Project Grudge and then Project Blue Book. So Hynek goes back to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, starts going through the accumulated case reports that have piled up since he was there. And he finds this same 80%, 20% ratio. 80% of the reports he can easily explain away as astronomical phenomenon. A familiar things seen in a familiar context is how he sometimes would describe it. So this same breakdown occurred in all these case reports. 80% explainable, 20% not so explainable. And, Hynek was a scientist, and scientists look for patterns and trends. So here he's faced with this huge pattern, this breakdown of 80%, 20% that's been going on for like the last 4 years since the Air Force has been collecting these reports. So that's what got Hynek thinking, maybe there's more to this than I've given it credit for. Maybe this is something worthy of a rigid scientific study. And that's how his whole second chapter began.
Yeah, and it's that moment which most people, they do not take that next step.
Yeah.
Because that next step is dangerous.
Yeah. Well, Hynek was a pretty courageous guy. He stood up to the U.S. Air Force on numerous occasions without blinking an eye.
Yeah, I think he faced what anyone would, which is that decision of, do I place myself in a position of vulnerability among my peers?
Yeah.
And he did. And I always wonder what it was, if it was one specific thing, one specific case. Like, I've always imagined there was one specific moment that tipped him over the edge and made him decide, damn it, I'm plunging forward. But the feeling I get reading your book and really trying to assimilate all this is that it was a series of things. And almost before he knew it, and I think he was driven by his own scientific curiosity.
Yeah, you got that exactly right. He, it wasn't necessarily one single case, although there is one that I could point to, but it was sort of a series of high profile, very difficult to explain UFO events that kind of caught Hynek and the Air Force off guard. But
I was going to say he was famous because there was one case that he responded to. It's the one, people talk about where he gave the explanation that it might be swamp gas.
Yeah.
And there was some blowback. And I wonder, I kind of got the feeling that was a moment where he felt like, well, I didn't really, that was not a great answer. And it implied that I'm explaining things away, and that's not really what I want to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it was partly these high profile cases like the one you just mentioned with swamp gas. But the other part of it was just after that swamp gas incident, Hynek he caught so much flack for that. I believe he said the right thing at the press conference. I honestly do. But,
really? That you agree with the swamp gas?
Yeah. But I think so. It was in the aftermath of that swamp gas fiasco that Hynek decided, you know what? I'm not going to carry water for the Air Force anymore. I'm not going to bend to their will. I'm not going to use their explanations for what's going on because I know for a fact that they're wrong. And that was, if there's any one big moment, I guess you could say it was that swamp gas incident and the fact that he decided he wasn't going to be a toady to the Air Force anymore.
Well, now, Mark, what you're implying is that the Air Force had an agenda.
Oh, perhaps I am.
The Air Force wanted it all to go away.
Yeah.
Okay. Because then it makes them look more in control of stuff in the sky.
Which is their only job. And they need to be able to do their only job, fairly competently.
You had one job.
Exactly. That's what it is. Yep.
So then it was after that, then he met Jacques Valleé.
They met while working together at Northwestern University.
Yeah.
Hynek was the astronomy guy. Valleé was kind of the computer guy. And they clicked. They understood each other. They spoke the same UFO language. and, just became fast friends and went on being friends for many, many years, even though they had a few falling outs. Their friendship was pretty rock solid for a long, long time.
It's so interesting because they both, when I think of Jacques Valleé, the first thing I think of is someone with a very sort of broad theoretical and open mind about the mythological origins of UFOs. And yet he was a scientist, but he had that, I always think of sort of the other aspect of his intellect. And then, of course, you have Hynek, also, rooted in science, but became open to the notion that there was a bigger mystery at hand. And it's so fun to think of the two of them. I mean, really, that's the movie. Let's see, My Dinner with Jacques.
Oh, I like that.
I just want to see the two of them. And there's so much written material about their conversations. And, I'm sure you've been through it all.
Well, and Jacques Valleé has written many, many books about the UFO phenomenon, about his relationship with Dr. Hynek. And they're great books. I don't know. You've probably read some of them, maybe all of them. I think I've read all of them. And it's great reading. He's a really great writer, really captivating stuff. Well, he's got such a great story to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's nice. It's nice to think about these two guys sharing ideas and also sort of feeling safe with each other to speculate on things that in many scientific circles, it would not be tolerated.
Yeah. Well, and Valleé would get frustrated with Hynek sometimes because Valleé was always ready to take that leap that you're describing. And Hynek wasn't always ready to take that big leap. Hynek was, he was a scientist. He was like nose down, looking for data, look for facts, only consider the facts. Valleé was willing to jump beyond the facts. So yeah, right. There was some friction sometimes. And in the swamp gas case, there was a lot of friction. Valleé thought that Hynek had wasted a wonderful opportunity to educate the world about UFOs. And then when Hynek came out with the swamp gas thing, Valleé was like, slap my forehead.
Well, then we, the name of your book, The Close Encounters Man, resonates because of the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I would assume most listeners would know, but maybe they don't, that those categorizations came from J. Allen Hynek, Close Encounters of the First, the Second, the Third Kind. That was his classification. He came up with that.
Yeah, that was after Project Blue Book had shut down and Hynek had sort of gone independent. That was, he wrote a couple of books, and one of his books was The UFO Experience, and that's where he introduced the close encounters terminology. And there's a very funny story about how that term came to be the title of Spielberg's film. I may have told you this before, but was it called Watch the Skies at the beginning, I think? Yeah. Okay. It was initially going to be Watch the Skies. When I was researching the Close Encounters Man in another basement, this one in Chicago, going through Dr. Hynek's old work correspondence and things. And I'm going through his file cabinets and I get to the letter S, and there are two files that jump out at me. One said Sagan and one said Spielberg. So I started with the Spielberg file. And yeah, I'm like kid in the candy store, right? I'm going through I open up the Spielberg folder, and the first thing I see is a copy of a letter that Dr. Hynek had written to Steven Spielberg saying, hey, Mr. Spielberg, I just heard that you're making a movie about UFOs and you're using my term, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He's like, maybe it would have been a good idea if you had talked to me first before you. So Hynek's writing this like painfully awkward letter to Steven Spielberg, basically saying, hey, man, you ripped me off. But he can't say that, or he doesn't want to say that. So I'm reading this letter. I'm like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. So the next letter under that one is Steven Spielberg's response. He responded really quickly to Hynek's letter. And he was he was awkward, but he was very apologetic. He said, I'm so sorry. There was no harm intended. He's like, one of my production assistants recommended your book, and I had everybody in the crew read it, and that term just kind of clicked with everybody. But he's like, don't worry, Dr. Hynek, that's not what we're going to call the movie. We're going to call it Watch the Skies. And Hynek's like, well, okay, that's great, but you're still. There's some material from that book, from Hynek's book, that ends up in Close Encounters in the movie, like the whole toll booth scene. I don't know if you remember that. That's all real stuff. Those are cases that Hynek investigated.
Right.
So there were some negotiations that went on because Spielberg changed his mind again and wanted to call the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So he reached a deal with Columbia Pictures, a.k.a. Steven Spielberg, where Hynek would be hired as a technical consultant. He'd be on set for 3 or 4 days, and he'd be paid like $500 a day. And his name would be on the promotional, not just his name, but the contact information for his UFO research organization, CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies. That information would be printed on the bottom corner of every movie poster that went out to every movie theater in the land.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And did that happen?
It did, yeah. It would be fun to find one of those posters. I don't know if any of them still exist. There must be some, because they must have printed hundreds, if not thousands of them.
Oh, but absolutely.
That was part of the deal. They hired him as technical consultant.
Okay.
And they gave him a cameo scene in the movie.
Well, I was going to say, he ended up in the movie. Was that like the payoff? It's like, oh, hey, can we use your title? Hey, by the way, want to be in the movie?
Yep, that's exactly how it came down, and it's a really, knowing what I knew about Hynek, watching that scene again just cracks me up, because he had a mustache and goatee for most of his professional life, and he smoked a pipe, and he wasn't always smoking it. Sometimes guys with pipes, they just sort of fiddle with it. And so there's this like 6.5 second scene after the mothership has landed and all the missing people have debarked from the mothership, and all these technicians witnessing this are all sort of standing still in statues in shock and awe. And Hynek sort of pushes his way to the front of the crowd just to get a better look at the aliens. And then he puts this pipe, he fiddles with his goatee and he fiddles with his pipe, and that's his scene. But he also said that they let the cameras roll, and the children who were made up to be the aliens,
right,
kept fussing with Hynek. They started tugging on his goatee and playing with his pipe. One of them, I guess, stuck the pipe up his nostril or something. There's a goofy story. And Hynek's like, I'm so glad they didn't use those scenes.
That is so funny, because, a lot of people don't know that those aliens were actually young girls from like a ballet class.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's a cool detail.
Yeah, they needed people who were the correct size in relationship to the other actors. They wanted the aliens to be a little bit smaller, but they also wanted them to have some experience in movement. And I think for whatever reason, it ended up being predominantly female class or group of girls who were studying ballet and had some training in movement that really Spielberg felt he could marshal to his cause. But they were little kids, and they got bored real fast and tired. And then they just started goofing around. And if you watch the movie and you kind of really just focus on that with that in mind, you can see that these aliens are just goofing around, chasing each other, slapping at each other, dancing. And, they're just kind of having a good time. And yet it works.
I'm going to have to pay attention the next time I watch the movie. I think that's hilarious.
Now, it's funny that Hynek gets to be in the movie, but Jacques Valleé is not in the movie.
Yeah, and there's a story behind that, and if I tell the story, I might get in trouble. I
definitely tell it.
Well, goes back to when I was researching the book, The Close Encounters Man. I am the kind of science fiction geek who collects fanzines, and keeps them in bankers' boxes in their basement. Just in case you ever want to look at them again.
One day someone's going to be going through your basement, having the same experience you had.
Exactly. So I'm that kind of sci-fi geek. And one of the old magazines I had when I was researching the book, I can't remember the name. I probably had it close by, but I don't want to search for it now. Anyway, a fanzine was doing a special issue on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because that was the science fiction event, aside from Star Wars, of that moment in history. So I knew that in that magazine they had done a very extensive interview with Dr. Hynek while he was on set. So the interview was really interesting. I started pinpointing a couple little things I might be able to use in the book. And then I get to a point where the interviewer says, now I believe that Francois Truffaut was cast as this French ufologist, and he was actually based on a real life acquaintance of yours. And you expect him to say, yes, Jacques Valleé. But that's not what Hynek said.
What? Yeah,
that's not what Hynek said. He said, yes, you're right. There is a French ufologist that we used, as a model for that character. His name was Claude Poher.
What's his name?
Claude Poher or Pohe. I'm not sure. He was French. And he was, I believe at that time, he was the head of France's officially sanctioned UFO research program. And that's who Hynek said inspired the character of Lacombe in the movie, played by Francois Truffaut. So I put that in my book, and I'm thinking, whoa, this is such a blockbuster revelation. This is really going to be cool. So I tell that story in the book. And when Jacques Valleé read my book, he went ballistic. And I mean, in retrospect, I feel like, well, yeah, of course, it was stupid of me to think that I could, just put this in my book and not have anyone respond to it. So Jacques Valleé has kind of hated me ever since then.
Oh my God, to be hated by Jacques Valleé.
Yeah. And I told him, I don't know how many times, I'm like, Jacques, I didn't say that. Dr. Hynek said it in response to a legitimate interview question. I did not say that, so quit dumping on me. But it didn't matter.
No, but it's true. I mean, that's, first of all, that is amazing. That is the first time I've ever heard that. It is part of legend and lore that role that Francois Truffaut played was based on Jacques Valleé. And yet you're saying that in an interview, J. Allen Hynek just automatically was like, oh yeah, no, I know who that was based on. It was actually based on this other guy, Claude, whatever.
Claude
Poher. Yeah. That is amazing. But I guess Jacques Valleé did get some cred for being that guy. And, that was, has been valuable to him. Okay.
Yeah.
Look, there can be two French guys interested in UFOs.
Yeah. I'm sure there were many. Well, there was
another guy. Amazing to me. Oh my God, Mark, did other people besides Jacques Valleé get in touch and go, oh, I never knew that?
Well, nobody got in touch with me, but I did a little background research to see if anybody else would corroborate the Claude Poher comment that Hynek had made. And I did find too, of course, I'm going to forget now what their source was, but there's a book that came out shortly after mine did on the making of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And in that book,
the big visual history one,
I can't remember. I'm not sure. There were probably several books of that nature published around that time, but the one I was looking at the time, it didn't go into names or anything. Oh God, I wish I could remember what was said and how it was worded. Maybe one of your listeners will dig it out.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Of the vault somewhere. But
they're book people. They'll reach out.
Yeah, I'm sure they. I mean, I lost my train of thought now. What was I talking about?
Well, in terms of other people who are like, oh yeah, no, we knew it was the other guy.
Yeah, there's a description. Oh, the description in this book, I believe the author talks about a meeting that took place between Spielberg and Valleé and I think maybe Julia Phillips, one of the producers of the movie.
Right.
So, but that meeting did not take place until after the movie was shot. So, so it's very difficult to make the case that that dinner or that lunch or whatever it was proves that Valleé was involved in the production of the movie. No, he was not. The movie was all done by the time Valleé met Spielberg. So that was the one corroborating thing. There was another one. I'm trying to think now. Of course, I'm going blank. But yeah, there was another source. I know. It's something about how maybe this was from the same book. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. But
no,
there was
not
something.
At all.
There was something about. Oh gosh, what was it? I keep having it on the tip of my tongue. I keep losing it.
This might actually just be us being in our 50s.
Well, yeah, it could be that. Well, but I've got you beat. I'm in my 60s.
Oh,
yeah.
What's it like there?
Oh, it's lonely. No, it's got some good parts. Let me just give me just a minute though.
Sure, take your time.
Come up with this second source.
It's just more work for Kevin to edit this. That's no problem.
The first one was about the lunch or the dinner meeting. The other one was about how I won't get this right. So the character in the movie was named Claude Lacombe. Jacques Valleé is the real life guy, and Claude Coher is the real guy who inspired the Lacombe character.
Right.
There was something to do with the fact that on like the third draft of the script, in the first couple drafts of the script, the character was given a name that was reminiscent of Jacques Vallée's name. On like the third or fourth draft of the trip, that character's name had been changed to something very unlike Jacques Vallée's name. And I can't remember the specifics, but that was my other corroboration for that story. Well, so that's just funny so your readers know, I tried my best to get to the bottom of that story.
Well, it's funny because it sounds like almost at the beginning someone was using Jacques Valléé as a reference, and then later almost corrected it.
It was odd.
Closer to the time that J. Allen Hynek was involved in the movie, but who knows? Look, in any case, well, and it's funny because there's all kinds of stories about how Steven Spielberg really did want Francois Truffaut to be in the movie. And regardless of who he was representing, so if he hadn't been so hot to get Francois Truffaut, we could have had the real French guy in there, and then we'd all know. But actually, maybe not, because Lacombe is a character who actually participates in the drama. It's a bigger role than J. Allen Hynek. So yeah, maybe we're stuck again. That's amazing. I love that. Oh, well, we really. Don't worry, Jacques Valleé does not listen to the show, so he'll never know.
Okay. Well, and we haven't gotten to the file folder that said Sagan. I don't know if you want to go there. That could take
for sure. What was that all about?
Oh, you want to hear about that?
Totally.
Sagan? Okay, well, everybody knows who Carl Sagan is, right? He's this Cornell astronomy professor, media celebrity, creator of the Cosmos TV show, which is one of the most amazing TV shows ever, in my opinion. And also a pioneer in the field of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Carl Sagan was very heavily involved in that. In fact, SETI's headquarters building, I believe, in California is named the Carl Sagan Center. So Dr. Hynek and Carl Sagan were contemporaries. They were colleagues. They were both astronomers. They were both active in the field or in the same time frame. So they crossed paths quite a bit. But when Hynek became more and more known for his UFO work during and after Project Blue Book, Sagan found Hynek an easy target. Even though Sagan believed that there was intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, he scoffed and ridiculed anybody who ever said they saw a UFO. It's very bizarre. I've been stewing over this for years. I can never understand it. And Sagan was brutal in his takedowns of UFO witnesses. He was brutal. was very, and it all came to a head on an episode, 1973, of the Dick Cavett talk show, which was a pretty big primetime talk show at the time. And they did a special show on UFOs because in just the previous weeks, we had had a spectacular UFO abduction in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And then we had had an equally amazing midair encounter with a UFO by an Army helicopter crew. Those had just both happened at the beginning of October, I believe, 1973. So Dick Cavett does a special UFO show. Why not? It's a hot topic. And among the guests are one of the crew members from the helicopter, the captain of the crew. This guy, Charles Berlitz, who wrote a book about the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh my God. Charles Berlitz.
And J. Allen Hynek was another one of the guests, and Carl Sagan was another one of the guests. And when Cavett got around to talking to Dr. Hynek and Dr. Sagan about UFOs, Sagan just let loose. I go into it in a lot of detail in my book. I can't remember the details now, but it was a really ugly scene. Sagan, and one of the two guys from the abduction in Pascagoula was also on the guest list. But Sagan was just brutal.
It's too bad because it feels like a missed opportunity. It feels like what Jacques Valleé and J. Allen Hynek were able to achieve in terms of common ground and a productive intellectual conversation could have happened with Sagan too. Yeah. But for whatever reason, and I have very mixed feelings about Carl Sagan for exactly the reasons you bring up, that he was open-minded in a certain way and yet resorted to ridicule in another, which really, I gotta say, I don't love. And in an alternate universe, there is a J. Allen Hynek, Carl Sagan, collab that is interesting and productive and fruitful, and we get something from that instead of just knee-jerk, look how stupid these people are.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating, but it makes me think now, and I may be leaping here, but I do want to talk about your new book because you have a new book coming out.
Yeah, but I do want to tell one more bit about the Sagan story, though.
Oh, please do, because I think it fits right in to the whole thing.
What your dream meeting between these two that you've just been talking about reminded me that almost did happen. Again, going back to the Sagan file in this guy's basement in Chicago, there was a letter from Dr. Hynek to Carl Sagan, very polite, very professional letter, saying, "Hey, Carl, I see where the two of us are going to be participating in a scientific conference in Chicago in a couple of months, and we've both been invited to be guest panelists." And Hynek went on to write, he said, "Could we please, for the sake of really giving our audience some educational value, could we please just call a truce? Could we call a ceasefire just for this one night when we're both on this as part of this conference," which, by the way, was going to be televised. And there was no response from Carl Sagan in the file. There may have been a response that never made it into the file, but as it stands now, there's nothing there. There was no response from Carl Sagan, and it shows because when their conversation began at this conference, it just quickly turned into a bloodbath.
Wow.
And again, I go into detail in the book on that, but yeah, just really, really, really shocking.
It's so strange because, as you said, Carl Sagan was open to the notion of extraterrestrial life. True. Extraterrestrial life. I'm sure he did not embrace the high strangeness of most UFO encounters, but he also wrote the book Contact, which, if you read the book or see the movie with Jodie Foster, seems to imply somewhat of an acceptance, or I don't know, advocacy, something, but an open mind toward a more like an embrace of the psychic element of these experiences, right?
Yeah. I don't even know how to respond to that. The only other thing I can offer is just to put a finer point on it. He was okay with the idea of he wasn't just okay with the idea of extraterrestrial intelligence. He was even okay with the idea of them visiting Earth. But he said that could only have happened 100,000 years ago. It's like there's no reason to think that aliens are visiting Earth like on a daily basis, buzzing our airplanes and stuff. There's no reason to think that, but there is reason to think that perhaps 100,000 years ago, the aliens visited us on Earth just to sort of check up on us.
But like, that's so weird. Cause like, why? Why does it make more sense that it happened in the past? Yeah. It feels very arbitrary. That is so weird. Well, again, a missed opportunity from two, admittedly, obviously brilliant guys who, working in concert could have come up with something. So, so your new book is called 1957, The Year Science Changed Everything.
Right. Except the year isn't part of the title. It's just called The Year Science Changed Everything. But the subtitle is...
Did I give away the ending? You talk about the year, but we don't find out until the end. It was 1957 all along.
All along. How did we miss that? Okay. It's called The Year Science Changed Everything, 1957's International Geophysical Year and the Future of Our Planet. That's
there you go.
Full title. It's a mouthful, I know.
Dang.
I can't seem to get away from those huge long titles.
Well, what I mean, now the book hasn't come out yet, so I haven't read it. But what is it about, and kind of what led you to take it on as your next project?
It's a really great story. You may remember, you're in the right age group. You may remember a hit song from 1982 by Donald Fagen from Steely Dan called IGY. Does that ring any bells? What a beautiful world this will be.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's this really lovely utopia song about Donald Fagen sort of dreaming of this future in which we're all wearing spandex jackets and we're going from New York to Paris by undersea railroad. And he just paints this really wonderful, like, science fiction utopia image of what life will be like in the future. And he called the song IGY, and it was a pretty big hit at the time. And I always liked the song, but never really thought much about what the IGY part of it stood for. Well, when I started writing my first book, The Close Encounters Man, see, all these things connect. It's very weird. When I started, let me explain what IGY is. That's where I need to start. IGY, it actually lasted a year and a half, 57 to 1958. It was an effort to unify all the world's scientists, to get them to drop all their biases and all their political affiliations and professional interests, and all work together to try to understand how the Earth worked and how the sun worked and how the solar system as a body worked. As recently as 1957, which to me is recent, we didn't know jack about any of this stuff. We knew nothing. That was the big shock for me when I started this book. We knew nothing relative to what we know now. It's crazy. So that was kind of what drove this whole thing. But what happened was, as a feature of IGY, both the U.S. and the USSR made pledges to launch orbital satellites as part of their IGY efforts. Okay, this led to Sputnik. You can already start connecting the dots. So both countries have pledged to put a satellite up into orbit during IGY. But
were they pledging in it sounds like it was not competitive or not,
right?
Or was it? It was sort of benevolent, like, let's do this and share information kind of thing. That was the goal. And for the most part, that's how it worked. Everybody cooperated. Everyone shared information. That was the spirit of IGY. And IGY standing for International Geophysical Year.
Right. But where the space satellites came in, it was already sort of a loaded topic. But basically, there was this big problem with putting a satellite in orbit. Once it's in orbit, how do you know where it is? How can you tell that it's up there? it was a huge head scratcher for the scientists of the day. How the hell do we keep track of this thing? If we can get it into orbit, how do we keep track of it? So Fred Whipple, who was in charge of the rocketry program, drafted this junior professor he worked with at Harvard, a guy named J. Allen Hynek, to create.
Wow.
Yeah, the weird connections, right? He commissioned, drafted, whatever term you want to use, J. Allen Hynek to design the world's first satellite tracking network. Obviously, this had never been done before because there had never been a satellite before. There was no need to have a tracking system. But Hynek has to basically take this thing that nobody has ever really imagined how it worked or how to build it. But he had to take this on. That was his job. His responsibility was to set up this tracking network for this satellite that may or may not ever get into space. So the U.S.'s Vanguard satellite, that was the one we had in the race. And the Soviets, of course, had Sputnik. And as most living, breathing humans know, the Soviets beat us to the punch with Sputnik, basically kickstarted the space race, and sort of forced the organizers of IGY to sort of relax a little on some of the rules, because yes, the USSR had kept some of their rocket knowledge a secret, and that was against the IGY rules. But here it's like, well, the damage has been done. It's not like we're going to kick the USSR out now, because it's been done. Everyone will benefit from the data that's collected. So that's where this book came from. And that's where my interest in IGY came from when I was writing my first book and learned about how Hynek put together this tracking system. So, and that whole chapter in this story ends up in my book. There's a chapter about rockets and satellites. And, again, this was all super new technology. Nobody knew if it would work. It was anybody's guess, and, really, really high stakes, not just for scientific knowledge, but, the reputation of whichever country made it into space first. I'll throw in a little twist though. One of the scientists I interviewed for the book told me that, and this was secondhand, he had heard this from someone who was deeply involved in IGY and in the formation of NASA. And this gentleman told me that this guy he met at a conference told him that President Eisenhower knew that we could have beaten the Soviets into space. We had a satellite that we could have gotten into orbit before the Soviets got Sputnik in orbit. Okay, this is shocking news to me. And it was shocking news to the gentleman who related to me. But he said Eisenhower was such a man of principle. He was devoted to the concept of free space. Space cannot belong to anybody, and it doesn't matter who gets out into space first, because it's all going to be a joint effort in the long run anyway. So according to this story, and I included it in my book, even though I wasn't able to corroborate it, I just sort of put it in my book the way it was expressed to me. But I found that really, really fascinating. We could have gotten up there first, but because of Eisenhower's principles, which you got to respect, I totally respect his thinking. He wasn't thinking in terms of who's going to be first and who's going to be second. He was thinking in terms of, let's just do it.
Right. Well, it brings, and again, not having read the book and really not knowing a lot about the social history of science in the last 100 years, it does bring up a question that I think everyone has a stake in and everyone has a thought about, which is, to what degree are our scientific advances sort of public property? And has that changed? And how is it thought of in 1957, and how is it thought of now?
That's a really, really good question. And it was one of the things that I really wanted to learn the most. That was high priority for me. How is the data used? Basically, that's the question. How is the data used? And the people who put IGY together thought it all through and had a really, really great plan. There still in existence. They call them world data centers, where every single outpost, and we're talking about bases in Antarctica. We're talking about astronomers, on mountain peaks in Hawaii, peering through their telescopes. All of those people sent their data to one of these world data centers where it was archived, but they were smart enough to know that that's not good enough. All the data was duplicated. It wasn't just sent to one world data center. It was sent to 2 world data centers. And if you were, say, an oceanographer, you had your specific data center where you would send your material to. So because they put it together this way, every field of knowledge, there were 14 fields of knowledge studied in IGY. And every one of those 14 fields, that data would be stored in at least 2 data centers, possibly 3. And the reason that's a good idea is because, as this expert explained to me in an interview, the reason that was a good idea was when the Russians invaded Ukraine, the World Data Center in Ukraine took a hit. All this knowledge, she didn't go into detail with me about how much damage was done or how it was done or when it was done, but she just said, well, what's going on in the Ukraine. They have lost quite a bit of their data, but it's okay because there was a duplicate set of that data in the UK. That's the way IGY set it up. There would always be backup, at least in theory. I don't think it's ever been proven wrong at this point. So I found that really fascinating. The idea of how was the data stored? How was it used? Now, once the data was stored, World Data Center, guess what? Any scientist in the world could request access to this data. Even if their country never took part in IGY, didn't matter. If you were a legit scientist doing legit research, you could contact the World Data Center, ask for certain data, and they would happily oblige. They would only charge you for the ink in the Xerox machine and the postage stamps to mail it back to the laboratory.
Wow. Well, yeah. but who administers that?
They had directors, each of these World Data Centers. And like I said, they're still out there. I interviewed the person who is oversees the entire network of World Data Centers. It's crazy. I really wanted to visit a World Data Center. That would have been the awesome result of that.
Well, you're
never could swing it though.
So actually, thank you for clarifying, because now I think I'm understanding something I didn't before. You're talking about an actual physical, let's say, brick and mortar, like a library. You're not just talking about something you can access on the internet.
But they are progressing to that. I'm glad you brought that up, because they are progressing towards having all this data on the cloud.
Right. It is so scary because you think about all the various ways that we now store information, our own personal information, and then shared scientific information that's obviously important to humanity. And so much of it is stored electronically, and that horrible thought that if somehow our ability to access and retrieve that goes away, then the knowledge goes away. Yeah. And then immediately you think, well, what about libraries? And you're like, well, I don't know. Are there libraries? And you're saying there actually are physical libraries, repositories of this knowledge.
Yeah, there are quite a few of them, and they're doggedly determined to protect this treasury of knowledge that they have.
I just keep picturing Burgess Meredith with a broken pair of glasses.
And maybe a cardigan sweater. Would you have a cardigan sweater on? I could see it too.
I am curious. You talk about 1957, and I'm picturing in my mind, a bunch of scientists getting together somewhere in some physical space and sharing information. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I mean that was encouraged. Cooperation. It was most notable, I think, in Antarctica, because there were a dozen or more countries that had permanent outposts in Antarctica, but nobody could claim Antarctica to be their own,
So do these International Geophysical Years, have they happened since? Again, I'm picturing a conference. Is it every year? Was that just the only one? Is it every 10 years?
Since that is also a really good question. The International Geophysical Year was unique in that it included so many different fields of science. Like I said, there were like 14 fields of science represented. There have been other years, but they've always been things like the International Polar Year. They're only going to study the Arctic and the Antarctic. So there were a couple of those leading up to IGY. And there has also been, I'm trying to think now, I think it was 2007 was the most recent, I may be getting this wrong, but I think 2007 was the most recent polar year. And there are future ones scheduled for like into the 2030s. And again, I'd have to check my references to which those are. But these things do happen periodically.
All right. So, yeah. Okay. Now, I hope this isn't, from the sublime to the ridiculous, but I happen to be rereading Jurassic Park right now.
Mm.
And there's, the character of Ian Malcolm, the chaos theory guy that Jeff Goldblum played in the movie. And in the movie, most of us, our takeaway from that guy is that he was a spokesman for chaos theory, and that somehow chaos theory is why Jurassic Park went wrong. And in the book, though, there's several sort of cutout moments where clearly Michael Crichton is having his say, or at least highlighting an argument from a character, and the character sort of kind of takes on science in a more caustic way than I recall from the movie. He literally is talking about the damage that science, almost the damage the process of science does to our physical world, and how science sort of encourages that because at least it's a physical demonstration of what they're doing. And he kind of uses the archaeological digs as an example. He's like, when you finish your dig in the Montana Badlands, do you then restore that area to what it was before you brought all of your stuff in to do your science? And Dr. Sattler says, well, no, not really. I mean, it is the Badlands. It's just the, and he's like, yeah, it's just the whatever. It's just the Everglades. It's just the Amazonian rainforest. He kind of, it was an unexpected point of view that I don't remember, certainly from the movie, but then takes on the notion that science immediately becomes commodified and turned into a profit-making enterprise. And I'm wondering, was that as much of an issue in 1957? I believe it is now. And does that get in the way of all of humanity benefiting from scientific discovery and development?
It's hard to respond to that question when I'm thinking about how NASA and NOAA and all these government scientific offices and programs are being ransacked and shut down and starved of resources. It's hard to say that the way science was done up until 3 months ago is still happening. And I find myself wondering, well, how will I present the book now? Because I've interviewed people from NOAA and people who work with NASA, and I've interviewed even a guy who works for the United Nations. How is science going to continue from this point on? And I have no idea, and I have no idea how to address. Well, it's too late to address it in the book because it's being published in a couple weeks. But I have no way of knowing how to think about how science will be done in the future. So I can't really answer the question. I don't know if anybody can.
I know what you mean. We're sort of in a difficult moment because I think a lot of people have always felt that America was at the forefront and has been at the forefront, and as a culture has valued those advances and has valued contributing to them both financially and politically. And that's what makes America, I think, for a lot of people. And now that is changing.
Yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen. Like part of me part of me feels like, wow, this is the worst time to be publishing a book that deals with climate science, because that was the whole idea behind the book. I knew I wanted to write about IGY, and I that rattled around in my head for a long, long, long time before I felt confident that I could tell the story, basically. And what made me feel confident that I could tell the story was the fact that I thought that IGY could serve as a model for a new era of scientific cooperation. And that seemed pretty clear cut to me, and it seemed like the best way to write the book. And now I'm not so sure. Maybe this is the absolute worst timing or the absolute best timing. I just don't know.
Or the absolute best timing, because the fact of the matter is people are still people. And people's interests are the same as they were 3 months ago and 6 months ago and a year ago. And the world physically is the same place. And there will always be people who are hungry for that knowledge and who want to participate in that conversation in an active way. And I think that's what your book does.
I appreciate that. That's a nice way to look at it. I like that.
So obviously everyone knows how to get books nowadays. So what is the publication date of your book? Because the nice thing and what I love so much about my audience is that they are book people and they're physical book people, you know.
Well,
they love holding the item in their hand. When does the book come out?
It comes out on Tuesday, May 6th.
Oh, great. Okay, great. So they can go get it.
Yeah, it's, and you can already pre-order it from Amazon, and I think probably also Barnes and Noble.
Okay, great.
So basically, the four main, my publisher at least, the way they roll out the book, they go to four major chains: Amazon, the obvious one; Barnes and Noble; Books A Million, which I had forgotten that even existed.
Wow!
And Goodreads, I think, is the last one.
Oh, great!
So in any of those, you should be able to find the book either on the shelf or order it online.
Okay, that's great. And I always, encourage people to go to their physical bookstores. And if you can't do that and you want to buy books online, I encourage you to go to bookshop.org, which is it benefits independent bookstores, and that's where they find the books and get them. Your local independent bookstore, and then they send them right to you. It might take a little longer, but guys, I'm talking to my listeners now. You've got a stack of books. If you have to wait an extra day or two in the mail for this one to arrive, you'll be okay. You've got something to occupy you. Anyway, Mark, this has been so great. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I loved it. Thanks for having me.
Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf is presented by Astonishing Legends, 134 West, and Summerland Entertainment. Executive producers, Scott Philbrook, Forrest Burgess, and Susan Lambert. Our associate producer is Tess Feifel, and our sound designer, engineer, and editor is Kevin Ducey. Artwork is by Tommy Beaver, website is by Kayla Lord, and our music, as always, is by Nima Kazaruni. Until next time, be safe and be well, find the light in the dark, and we'll see you again soon.